Hi, Marc, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on the politics in Africa and Arabia. And today we need to talk about the situation in Sudan once again. Even before an agreed ceasefire in Sudan expired, fierce fighting broke out again in the capital Khartoum on Sunday. There was heavy fighting near the army headquarters, as eyewitnesses reported to the AFP news agency. In addition, northern suburbs were attacked from the air. A ceasefire was actually in effect until midnight on Sunday, but this had been violated repeatedly in the past few days before. In Sudan, army units under the command of military ruler Abdel Fattah al-Burhan have been fighting the RSF militia led by General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo for the past 2 weeks. According to official figures, more than 500 people have been killed and around 4,600 injured in the fighting. The actual number of victims is believed to be much higher, though. Countless people are also on the run because of the fighting. Western countries, such as Germany, where I'm sitting, have brought their citizens to safety by jet or ship. The European Commission sees the risk of the unrest in Sudan spreading to neighboring countries. The risk that the crisis will spread to surrounding countries in the region is real. That was said by EU Commissioner Janez Lenarčič, responsible for humanitarian crisis management, and he said that to German media. Other states that are highly fragile border Sudan, and the consequences would be disastrous. No one can want that. That's why the first priority must be to bring the two warring parties to their senses, he said. Lenarčič expects the situation in Sudan to worsen, which was already dramatic before the current crisis, and now can only get worse. The country is on fire, lacking everything: clean water, food, medicines, fuel, said the commissioner. Hundreds of humanitarian programs across the country have been suspended, warehouses looted, and transportation that aid workers rely on destroyed. The two warring parties alone are responsible for this, but the civilian population of Sudan has to pay for it, said Lenarčič. The ongoing violence in Sudan could plunge the entire East African region into a humanitarian crisis beyond the country. Even before the fighting broke out, a third of the population was starving in the country. Now there is a shortage of everything and food prices are skyrocketing. That was said by the director of the World Food Programme of the United Nations in Germany, Martin Frick, and he told this to the German press agency. Similar price increases are also occurring in the neighboring countries of Chad and South Sudan. Both countries have taken in thousands of refugees since the fighting began in Sudan. In South Sudan, which is sinking into floods due to the climate and drying up elsewhere, food prices have risen by 28% in a very short time, said Frick. Added to this is the tense situation in the Horn of Africa, where after 6 failed rainy seasons, the need is also at a record level. The WFP has had to suspend its support to 7.6 million people in Sudan as a result of the fighting. And according to Frick, refugees who have found shelter in Sudan, pregnant women or malnourished children, would be left with nothing without the support of the WFP. As soon as the security situation allows, the aid should be resumed. And the Netherlands has completed the evacuation of its nationals from embattled Sudan. An 8th and final evacuation flight left Sudan for Jordan late on Saturday evening, as the Defense Ministry said in The Hague. A total of at least 160 Dutchmen were taken out of the African country, 85 of them by Dutch Air Force aircraft. The rest could have flown on flights from other European countries. The Netherlands also took 130 people of 18 other countries on their flights, they say. And Britain has also ended the evacuation of its citizens from Sudan. The last British military flight left the African country late on Saturday evening, as the Foreign Ministry said in London on Sunday morning. The British government is no longer carrying out evacuation flights from Wadi Saidna Airport, they said. A total of at least 1,888 people were taken out of the country on 21 flights. These are primarily British people and their closest relatives. It's estimated that thousands of Britons could still be in the country. Secretary of State Andrew Mitchell called the mission extremely successful on the BBC. And at the same time, he emphasized, in view of such dangerous circumstances, we cannot stay there forever. And Foreign Secretary James Cleverly announced that he would continue to push for a diplomatic solution to end the bloodshed. Ultimately, a stable transition to civilian rule is the best way to protect security and prosperity of the Sudanese people, Cleverly said. Because according to the United Nations, more than 800,000 people are likely to flee to neighboring countries if the fighting in Sudan continues. Without a swift solution to this crisis, we will see more people forced to flee their homes in search of safety and basic support. That was said by UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees Raouf Mazou in Geneva on Monday. The United Nations Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs in Sudan, Abdou Dieng, said the humanitarian crisis could escalate into a total disaster. UN Emergency Aid Coordinator Martin Griffiths, who was expected in Sudan on Tuesday, spoke of an already catastrophic situation. In consultations with all affected governments and partners, we came up with a planning number of 815,000 people who could flee to the 7 neighboring countries, said Mazou. In addition to 580,000 Sudanese, these include more than 200,000 people who are already in Sudan as refugees. So far, 73,000 people have fled to neighboring countries. The Northeast African country borders Egypt, Libya, Chad, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. And as I already said, Britain has already evacuated their people from Sudan, and with 21 Air Force aircraft, and many other countries did the same. The last one was made possible by the ceasefire that was broken time and again. And the evacuation campaign was initially only planned for holders of a British passport and their relatives, as I said, but there was sharp criticism in Great Britain because around 20 Sudanese doctors from the British Health Service NHS who had visited their families in Sudan were finally also flown out because of this criticism. And the government announced in London on Sunday then, rather than what I said earlier, that another plane was scheduled to take off from Port Sudan on the Red Sea on Monday. And Britain had opened up a consular office in Port Sudan to help people leaving Sudan and wishing to travel by sea to Saudi Arabia. And there were so many other countries, my own country as well, flew out a lot of people from Sudan, not only with a German passport. There was so much chaos there. And I already talked in the video last week about the flights from Spain, the evacuation of Greek people, and so on and so on. And they really need a diplomatic solution. In the end, this is all about the 2 highest leaders of the military fighting each other. The one from the original military, the other one from the militia that was fighting the military for years until they signed a peace treaty. And those 2 together, both military leaders, were supposed to prepare this country to have a civilian government in the future. But all the time, you couldn't see anything about this. And this fight now is about the integration of this militia into the military and the leadership there definitely as well. And so the UN is right and the EU is right. The best solution would be if they finally would come to their senses and start the preparations for democratic elections and a civilian government. But it doesn't look like this at the moment. And if you want to know more about other parts of the world, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.